So I'm no fan of stealing data per se. Darknet markets are one thing, buyers and sellers, right? They make their own choices. It's consensual, basically, between both parties in that particular case. But taking someone's personal information without their permission, definitely, in my opinion, crosses the line, as does basically any crime with an actual victim. Now, that said, I respect the intellect that it actually takes to be a threat actor because it takes a lot. And I would say that Intel Broker had it in spades. Over the years, I knew him, and I like to think I knew him fairly well. He was always honorable, straightforward, and generous with his time for anyone that needed help or had questions. Even threat actors can have honor. And his story is one that I feel deserves to be told. Unfortunately, we won't have time to actually do that here. Now, on June 9th of 2025, I received a fairly expected message through one of my privacy-centric communication channels that I actually have. A mutual friend had facilitated the actual contact. And the message was really straightforward and simple. It just said, "Hi, Sam, it's me, IB." Now, even though I expected it, I needed to actually verify it was actually him. We always kind of default to the don't trust, verify model that I always say. He didn't have access to PGP, but we had something else. We had shared memories and shared secrets. I asked him some questions that I knew only he would have the answers to, and he aced them. Then I asked him to delete the answers to maintain security, which would help out if the phone hadn't been compromised and, like, say the guards found it afterwards. This whole conversation took place with him sitting in a prison cell. But anyways, I had him delete the answers to maintain that. So if the phone got taken or whatever, they wouldn't have those shared secrets, which he did without argument. And Intel Broker told me that he was okay, but that he had been planning a trip up north and accidentally crossed into Finland, where he got checked at the border, which makes sense, and arrested. And this is a man who breached Europol, right? He owned breach forms for a short period of time and penetrated Fortune 500 companies. Like, they were basically back to December 16th of 2024. When I actually sat down with Intel Broker for what would become, unbeknownst to him and me, his final interview as a free man. We'd been talking for years after he actually reached out as a fan of this channel that you're watching, which blew my mind, hands down. I have so many of you out there that are, like, I would say, like, infinitely more qualified and interesting than I am, but it's just crazy how awesome like the subscribers are on this channel. Anyways, here's this guy who compromises, like, major corporations. He kicks governments in the teeth. He's pounding on Ellie on a regular basis and for fun in a lot of cases. And in his side time, he's watching my YouTube videos, which is awesome. The interview actually revealed some brilliance, but definitely also revealed him actually burning out. And he said that in the interview. If you want to go back and see it, you'll see what I'm talking about. When I asked him why he got into hacking, he didn't give me some massive manifesto about fighting the system and fighting the man. He just basically said it was for money, for living expenses and rent, for keeping a roof over his head. And I think a lot of us can definitely vibe with that statement, because I think a lot of people are in that position right now. And that's just a reality that most people, I think, don't really understand about people like him. They're incredibly brilliant. Many are down to earth. And this is what they can do. So it's what they do. He credited his abilities to Asperger's, saying it gave him the focus and pattern recognition needed for work. Whether true or not, I don't really know. He was already talking about wanting to get out when he was mentioning stuff like legitimate work, like red teaming or bug hunting and starting a family. The burnout basically was real and eating at him. As someone who broke the law and created businesses from scratch, I can say that doing it legally, now from my standpoint, is much easier, right? Like, you pay less in taxes. which I know sounds insane, but really it's true in the long run. When the feds bust you, they take everything. Yeah, you're keeping anything. Plus, you have restitution, and then you have to work for 12 cents an hour while you're incarcerated, or you go to solitary. So there's that. Anyways, we fast forward to the actual arrest, right? February 22nd, 2025. And French authorities working with the FBI arrested IntelBroker, or that's like the public story that we're getting fed anyways by them. I personally don't know how much truth there is to that. I tend to have a healthy distrust for federal forces in general. I don't want to say I don't think it's true, but based on what I heard from him, there's a chance that it might be. Like the feds lie, even in France, right? So IntelBroker had been living in Russia for years, a really kind of classic move for cyber criminals, since Russia doesn't really extradite to the United States and generally leaves you alone if you don't target Russian interests. He claimed to be a Serbian national, which added another layer to the judicial complexity, I should say, since Serbia really isn't eager to ship people to American federal prisons for crimes. So, from this relatively safe position, he essentially orchestrated some of the most significant breaches that I've actually witnessed. I don't want to say in real time, but I've seen disclosed in real time. And like, now I don't mean like size wise, I mean like inconsistency, because it was right on a regular basis and with kind of hardened targets. So he ended up crossing the border in Finland. And from how he phrased it, it seemed accidental. It didn't seem intentional. So Finland had basically closed all its borders with Russia in December of 2023. That was because they were claiming that Moscow was basically weaponizing migration. The entire 1,340 kilometer border is now one of the most monitored front lines in Europe, with stuff like thermal cameras and sensors and armed guards and all that kind of stuff. And IntelBroker basically tried to cross it, which makes absolute sense if you know who he is, right? Like, yeah. He's going to try to break in. And his prison messages that he sent basically gives clues about why someone operationally careful most of the time, because we don't actually know how he got busted. Probably something stupid. It's always something stupid. I just hope it's not something like as obvious, like ridiculously obvious. Anyways, I digress. Like he had mentioned stuff like mental health issues and needing to stay in Germany for medical reasons. He cited stress and anxiety, and that makes sense given what he's going through. It was the first time he's being incarcerated, and everyone has those feelings. I published our actual interview on April 15th of 2025. But by then, he had already been in custody for like 2 months or something, according to, if we listen to them. Nobody in the scene, the cybercrime scene, actually knew. And that's myself included. I released it when breach forums went dark because it was a great time to release it, right? Like it was advantageous to release it at that point. And I called it a shutdown, not a seizure, because there was really no federal banner, and the feds love to flag their victories. Like that's kind of their thing. So the forums went absolutely crazy with speculation. Of course, Telegram, where no threat actor should be, has a bunch of threat actors. like, but people analyzed his last post and everything, basically, kind of looking for clues. And from my perspective, it was kind of simple. Like he just clearly said in the interview that he was tired and basically wanted to retire. And that's what I took it as, right? Like that interview was recorded in December of 2024. So he, at that point, probably was already starting to retire. And that's why he chilled out on posting. He really didn't post much from that point on breach forums. At that point, he did kind of retire and he stepped back and then breach forums basically took itself down. And then they tried saying that we took it down because there was a 0 day and it might have made the forum vulnerable. Like, you guys know it's a 0-day. Why don't you just look at what it exploits and patch it? Like, if there's no patch, like, and who's just going to stumble upon this 0-day? And I never even disclosed what it was. Anyways, side issue, he had already basically been retired then, right? So while the cyber community kind of spun all these different ideas of what it could be, he was kind of learning firsthand that European detention facilities vary wildly in their treatment of prisoners, especially high profile ones like himself. They'd been moving him constantly, and the feds call this diesel therapy. We call it that here in the US because the smell of the bus fumes that you have to get on and endure for hours basically when you're in the bus being transported. So when I got that message on June 9th, I gave him a bunch of legal advice. And I had to be certain, though, that it was him, like I said before. And federal agencies basically love to try and fake personas to try and map networks and gather intel, and even through facilitating third parties that seem trustworthy, right? Trust just isn't enough, right? So once verified, the full picture really came into play. He had cited people at a hanging yelling obscenities as someone's about to get hung, right? Like, but they all want to be able to one to pull a switch and be the one to hang him. So U.S. federal prison, if he went there, means at least 25 years, like minimum, based on kind of my assessment of hypothetically what the charges would be. If they actually launch a criminal complaint or indictment, then I'll actually be able to get a more realistic view of it. But they get him, they're going to hit him as hard as they can. And it's going to be something like 25, probably at least. But Israel detention, on the other hand, operates on a completely different level altogether. Like, and I told him straight that, like, in Israel, they're going to start with torture, like sensory deprivation, starvation, beatings, medical experiments, rape. All of these things are documented facts from the UN, the Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International. It's not just like something I made up. So I gave him the best advice that I could, starting off with really simple stuff like go to court clean, shave your face, don't laugh, don't joke, don't smile. Like, don't let the judge think that you think that this is a game. Document everything, the arrest date, what they said, timeline of events, all that kind of stuff. And also frame everything in a humanitarian kind of concern about Israeli detention, citing UN reports and the European Convention on Human Rights. Emphasize that he wasn't fleeing, but seeking due process. Stick to the actual story that he told in the interview, basically about being retired, because that'll show that he wasn't actually a criminal at the point of him actually getting caught, which matters. All these things matter. So I told him exactly how to frame it. I gave him quotes. I told him to say, basically, I understand both the United States and Israel seek my extradition, and I respectfully request that this court prioritizes the United States based on humanitarian grounds and procedural consequences. Now, our friendship over the years of correspondence that we've had it has been really interesting. IntelBroker basically repeatedly offered to help me a bunch of different ways and crazy amounts of generosity, right? Like which are like six figures kind of stuff. And yeah, I had to turn him down every time. And we'd have long discussions about me grinding and him battling with stuff like alcoholism. But it was really cool that, like, whenever I hit a rough patch, he'd offer something, and the offer is enough. Like, I always declined, and not because like I didn't need help or like because I was too proud to take any help. It would have made my life a lot easier, to be honest. But like, it's because the United States conspiracy laws are just brutal. They're absolutely unforgiving, and it's a catch-all to wrap people up. So accepting money from, for example, a cyber criminal knowingly basically puts you in part of the conspiracy in a federal prosecutor's eyes, essentially. But those offers revealed like who he was beyond the hacker persona for me, right? Like this wasn't some cartoon villain cackling while stealing your data. This was someone who saw a friend struggling and wanted to help someone who they saw was actually worth it. Someone who, despite operating in like a really distrustful world, right, full of mistrust and paranoia, maintained his human connections and human dignity. And again, even though I never accepted it, was like it's the offer alone that really meant a lot coming from someone like him. Now, our last exchange was June 15th, and I had basically sent him a message saying, "Are you there?" and got nothing. Not that day, and nothing since. And that's really sucked. IntelBroker, who maintained a presence across multiple platforms for years, like the guy who survived FBI takedowns and had went and taken the site back from the FBI when they seized breach forums the very last time, had completely gone dark. And maybe he was transferred. Maybe they found his phone. Maybe his lawyers got through to him. Either way, his silence to me really hit differently than previous absences. 10 days later, on June 25th, 2025, social media exploded with claims that IntelBroker had been arrested. The problem essentially was that he was locked up and had been since February. Again, or so they say. The French administrators were arrested on June 23rd and had probably been under surveillance since February. Using stuff like confusion as a weapon is really kind of straight out of the Fed's playbook. Now, IntelBroker's story is ultimately about the cost of living outside of the law in general. And you could say he made money, probably millions. I wouldn't doubt that. He definitely proved corporate security is often just security theater. And he built an empire with breached forums, which he came to own. Started off as a mod and built his way up and commanded respect across the global cybercrime ecosystem. Like, what did it cost him? What could he have done with that intelligence that wouldn't have cost him essentially his life? It'd definitely be his life if he goes to Israel, and it'll be a life sentence if he goes to the United States. So kind of either way, it's going to suck. But he endured years of paranoia, never knowing if the knock would be federal agents, never able to fully trust anyone, living in countries chosen for non-extradition treaties rather than kind of quality of life, and watching legitimate opportunities pass by because accepting them would mean exposure. And during our December interview, he basically told me straight up that the mental stress and paranoia just aren't worth it in the long run. Having been on the run from law enforcement for 15 years myself, I know the feeling. I totally get it. He warned others about it, and even while being unable to actually escape himself. So I didn't make this video as a like news item, like I usually do. I made it to basically talk about my friend and not the evil hacker people see threat actors as, and not the guy who broke into Europol or took breach forms back from the Fed, just a guy, not some scary boogerman dropping shells everywhere. I told him that I could file paperwork, which I can. I can absolutely write up stuff and file it for him, and I would have done that. And he just wasn't really up for anything, it seemed like. So, but that's what friends do at the end of the day, in my opinion. And that's true, especially when one is facing extradition to countries that view hackers as terrorists and punish them with human rights violations in exchange. So even when logic says distance yourself or protect your interests, but I tend to not do that. I tend to be loyal to a fault because at the end of the day, like we're all human, and even the ghosts that are in the machines are human. And when I warned him about things like Israeli prison conditions and that was the reality of the incarceration there, I think I don't know if it actually got through. And that's what really sucks at the end of the day. Because you can only tell someone, I can tell you about prison, but you really don't understand it unless you're actually there. It's not something that can be understood. So like watching Oz or there's a fist fight and the guard runs and steps inside. Like that's make believe land. But you're always better off expecting the worst. It's what I found, and preparing mentally for worst case scenarios rather than expecting something better and being disappointed or shocked. And that's why I tried to shell shock him, because that might be his reality. Like there'll be tons of people talking badly about him now. And that's because he's busted, pointing out shortcomings, laughing at him. And that's just kind of how it goes, right? The guy's a legend. For people to make fun of someone like that, it would be like, I don't know, making fun of Tiger Woods for missing a hole in one or making fun of some basketball player. I'm not into sports. What I'm saying, that's how I see it. It's just stupid. Like who criticize who could never actually do even a quarter of the things that that person can do. So that's it. And I'm in that case too. Like if I do an episode on him, I'll be criticizing him for something I can't do either. I do hope to find out what it was that actually got him, though, how they connected those pieces. I'm really interested to see that. Anyways, I do the same thing here with darknet vendors who make dumb OPSEC mistakes. That's just how it goes. Like until you become non-existent, right? And people move on to the next headline. All the while, your memory fades until people actually forget you even existed. I just wanted to show the part that the French authorities didn't actually show. And that's of a human being that's brilliant enough to penetrate anything security wise, but still human enough to, need things that require leaving in the shadows. Now, I wish he'd taken my advice and gotten into research or teaching, which I told him multiple times. And I hope that one day I'll be able to speak to my friend again. I don't want him to come to the US to serve his time because they'll give him a crazy amount of time. But at the same time, I do, because it would be great to be able to actually see him and say hi and visit with him. Yeah, I'll send him books and all that stuff. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, it always sucks when goes through a rough patch. He's never mean to me or cruel to me. He's always good to me, kind. So to me, it's unfortunate. I know a bunch of you out there are going to be like, oh, he was a hacker. Screw that dude. He stole people's stuff. I completely understand that perspective. But anyways, thank you for listening to me ramble and rant about this. When more news comes out about this, if it does, we don't really know. I'll definitely cover it here. So in any case, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.